A few years ago, I moved to a quiet rural town, far away from the noise of the city. I had spent most of my 20s trapped between crowded streets, sleepless nights, and apartment windows that looked directly into the lives of strangers. I wanted silence. Real silence. The kind that lets you hear your own breathing when you wake before dawn. The house I rented sat near the edge of a vast forest that seemed to stretch endlessly beyond the horizon. Pines towered over narrow dirt paths, and during the early mornings the fog drifted low across the ground like pale smoke. It felt ancient there, untouched. Sometimes the wind moved through the trees in long whispers that sounded almost human. Most people would probably find the place lonely. I loved it immediately. Every Saturday morning became a ritual for me. I would wake before sunrise, make coffee pull on my hiking boots, and disappear into the woods for hours. The forest became my sanctuary. There were dozens of hidden trails branching away from the main paths, and I spent weeks exploring every corner I could find. Eventually, I discovered a narrow trail behind my neighborhood that connected to a public nature reserve several miles away. Hardly anyone seemed to know about the path. It twisted through dense woodland before opening into the official hiking trails near a small public park with benches, picnic tables, and restrooms. It felt like my own secret passage into another world. Whenever I found somewhere beautiful, I would record small videos on my phone. Nothing professional, just little diary entries for myself. Sometimes I filmed waterfalls hidden beneath moss-covered cliffs. Sometimes abandoned clearings where sunlight spilled through the trees in golden beams. I never uploaded them online. They were personal memories, fragments of peace I wanted to keep forever. Looking back now, I wish I had never brought that camera into the woods. The day everything happened began, strangely. From the moment I entered the forest that morning, something felt wrong. I cannot explain it properly, even now. Nothing specific frightened me. There was no sound of footsteps behind me, no movement between the trees. Yet every instinct inside me felt sharp and alert. The forest seemed quieter than usual. Too quiet. Each crack of a branch made my shoulders tense. Every gust of wind felt like a warning. Several times I stopped walking entirely just to listen. Nothing. Only silence. I told myself I was imagining things. Anxiety does strange things when you spend too much time alone. Still, the feeling refused to leave me. It clung to my chest like invisible hands tightening around my ribs. After hiking for nearly an hour, I came across a small clearing I had never seen before. The ground there dipped slightly downward into a shallow swamp, surrounded by tall reeds and dark water. Dead trees rose from the mud like skeletal fingers. Oddly enough, despite the unsettling atmosphere of the forest that morning, the clearing itself felt peaceful. The sunlight reflected softly across the still water. Dragonflies hovered over the reeds. Somewhere nearby, I could hear the faint trickling of a creek. For the first time all morning, I finally relaxed. I pulled out my phone and began recording. "Just found this little clearing," I said quietly into the camera. "Probably heading back toward the public trails soon. Honestly, I don't know why, but today feels weird." I remember laughing softly after saying it, embarrassed by how paranoid I sounded. Then I turned the camera off. If I had looked behind me for even a second, maybe things would have ended differently. But I didn't. I stayed there another minute or two before continuing toward the public hiking trails. The uneasy feeling slowly returned as I walked. By the time I reached the park area, my nerves were completely frayed. The public restroom sat near the edge of the parking lot, surrounded by thick trees. There were only a few cars parked nearby that day, and the entire place felt strangely empty. I went inside for a moment to wash my face and calm down. When I stepped back outside, a man was standing directly in front of the entrance. He wore a black hoodie despite the warm weather. A purple baseball cap shadowed most of his face, and dark sunglasses hid his eyes completely. "Hey there," he said casually. His voice startled me because he spoke with such confidence, almost as if we already knew each other. I forced a polite smile. "Hi." He laughed lightly and made some joke about us almost bumping into one another. I gave an awkward chuckle and tried to walk past him. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned slightly. He waved. "Looks like we're heading the same way," he said. Something about him instantly made my stomach tighten. Maybe it was the way he smiled too much. Maybe it was how his voice remained calm while his body seemed strangely tense beneath the hoodie. I told him I was waiting for someone. That was a lie. He nodded, slowly, pretending to accept the answer. then walked several feet away before suddenly turning back toward me. Actually, he said, "Could you help me with something?" Every alarm inside my body went off at once. He explained that his car was having trouble and said the hood latch kept sticking. According to him, he needed small fingers to help pry it open while he lifted the hood. I remember staring at him in disbelief. Nothing about the story made sense. Worse, only moments earlier, he claimed he was heading toward the hiking trail, not the parking lot. I pointed this out nervously. He laughed again. "Oh yeah," he said quickly. "I was taking that trail to get back around to my car." The parking lot was literally in the opposite direction. At that moment, fear settled fully into my chest. I began considering whether I should lock myself inside the restroom and call someone. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he was simply awkward. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. Then, thankfully, a couple walked nearby. Without thinking, I hurried directly toward them. "Oh my God," I exclaimed to the woman, as though we were old friends. "It's been forever." The woman looked confused for only half a second. Then she saw my face. I will never forget the way her expression changed instantly. She understood. The man in the purple hat lingered nearby, watching us carefully. I could feel his eyes studying me behind those sunglasses, trying to decide whether I actually knew them. I kept talking rapidly to the couple, asking fake questions about their families, pretending we had known each other for years. Finally, after nearly a minute of silence, the man turned and walked toward the parking lot. I watched him climb into a small red sedan. Then he drove away. Only after the car disappeared did I finally breathe properly again. The couple stayed with me for a while afterward. They asked if I wanted them to call the police or drive me home. I declined both offers, though my voice shook while speaking. I thanked them repeatedly before leaving. The entire walk home felt unbearable. Every sound behind me made me spin around. Every passing car slowed my heartbeat. By the time I reached my house, my nerves were completely destroyed. I locked every door immediately and poured myself a large glass of wine, hoping the nightmare of the day would slowly fade. But it was only beginning. Later that evening, while sitting on the couch, I started reviewing the videos from my hike. At first, everything seemed normal. Trees, trails, sunlight. Then I opened the clip from the swamp clearing. I watched myself speaking casually to the camera. Just found this little clearing, and then I saw it. At first, my brain could not process what I was looking at. Far behind me, partially hidden among the trees, stood a dark figure. Purple hat, black hoodie, perfectly still, watching me. My entire body went cold. I replayed the video again and again, each time feeling sicker. He had already been there, before the restroom, before he approached me, before he spoke to me. He had been following me through the woods. Suddenly, every strange feeling from earlier that day made horrifying sense. The silence, the fear, the sensation that someone was nearby, even when I saw no one. He had been there the entire time, watching, waiting. I began shaking uncontrollably. The worst part was not knowing how long he had followed me. 10 minutes, an hour. Had he seen where I entered the woods? Did he know where I lived? And what exactly had he planned to do if that couple had never appeared? The thought still makes me feel physically sick. I called the police that night and reported everything. Officers searched the area and took a copy of the video, but as far as I know, they never identified him. No arrests. No answers. Nothing. After that day, I never hiked alone again. About a year later, I moved away completely. Sometimes, even now, I still think about the moment I watched that video and realized someone had been standing behind me the entire time. There is something deeply horrifying about understanding danger only after you survive it. People love to talk about ghosts and monsters hiding in forests, but the truth is far worse, because sometimes the thing watching you from the trees is real. Chào Chủ tịch Nguyễn Văn Đức. Ron had always been the rational one between us. He was the kind of man who laughed during horror films, rolled his eyes at ghost stories, and believed every strange sound in the middle of the night could be explained by old pipes or bad insulation. We had known each other since university, and in all those years I had never once seen genuine fear in his eyes. That changed the night he told me about the house. It happened about 4 years ago, shortly after Ron and his wife Tina moved into a new place on the outskirts of town. The house itself was beautiful in an old-fashioned European sort of way. 2 floors, dark wooden beams, narrow windows, and a steep roof that groaned softly whenever the wind touched it. It sat alone at the end of a quiet street lined with dead autumn trees. The kind of house people usually dream about owning. At first, everything seemed perfect for them. Then the noises started. I remember meeting Ron at a small pub one rainy evening. The windows fogged from the warmth inside, while rainwater slid slowly down the glass outside. We sat in the corner beneath dim amber lights drinking whiskey, while soft jazz played somewhere in the background. I casually asked him how married life in the new house was going. For a second he said nothing. Then he looked down into his drink. That was the first moment I realized something was wrong. "You're going to laugh at me," he muttered. Naturally, I did laugh a little. Ron had always been dramatic when stressed. I expected him to complain about plumbing issues or expensive repairs. Instead, he leaned closer and whispered, "I think there's something in the house." I smiled immediately. "A mouse." He didn't smile back. "No," he said quietly. "Something else." He explained that strange things had been happening almost every night since they moved in. It began with noises, soft footsteps overhead, when nobody was upstairs, quiet thuds echoing through empty rooms, doors creaking open in the middle of the night. At first they ignored it. Old houses make sounds. Everyone knows that. But over time, the disturbances became harder to explain. Furniture would shift slightly overnight. Kitchen drawers would be left open. Objects disappeared completely. One morning, Ron discovered his favorite Miami Dolphins coffee mug missing from the kitchen counter. They searched the entire house and never found it. Tina became convinced the house was haunted. Apparently, the real estate agent had informed them before purchase that an elderly man had died in the house years earlier. Because of that history, the property sold far below market value. Tina believed the dead man never left. I nearly choked laughing when Ron told me that part. "You don't seriously believe this, do you?" I asked. Ron rubbed his hands nervously together before answering. "I didn't, at first. Then, he told me about the basement. A few nights earlier, both he and Tina had awakened suddenly around 3 in the morning to the sound of something crashing downstairs. Not a small sound either, something heavy slamming against concrete. Ron forced himself to investigate. The basement beneath the house was enormous, cluttered with old storage boxes left by previous owners. According to him, the darkness down there felt suffocating, almost alive. He searched for several minutes but could not immediately identify the source of the noise. Then, while standing near the back wall, he saw movement. Just movement. Nothing more. Something shifting in the corner. That was enough. He ran upstairs so fast he nearly fell on the stairs. After that night, neither he nor Tina could sleep properly anymore. They began staying in hotels whenever possible, because Tina became completely convinced the house contained something supernatural. Normally, I would have continued mocking him, but Ron looked genuinely broken. There were dark circles beneath his eyes. His hands shook slightly while drinking. Even his voice sounded exhausted. Fear had consumed him slowly night after night until he no longer trusted his own home. I started feeling sorry for him, so I offered to check the basement myself. Ron immediately looked horrified. "You shouldn't antagonize it," he whispered. I burst out laughing again. "There is no it, Ron." He insisted Tina would never allow me near the basement if she knew. Apparently, she believed disturbing the spirit would make things worse. The whole situation felt absurd. Still, part of me wanted to prove once and for all that there was nothing paranormal happening in that house. I thought maybe someone was breaking in, or perhaps stress had simply driven them into paranoia. Either way, I intended to solve the mystery. The next evening, Ron picked me up just after sunset. The drive to the house felt strangely tense. Rain clouds hung low above the streets, turning the entire sky dark gray. Ron barely spoke during the ride. When we arrived, the house looked even more unsettling than I expected. Most old homes feel warm despite their age. This one didn't. The windows reflected darkness like black mirrors. The porch light flickered softly in the cold wind. Even the trees surrounding the property seemed dead and twisted. Ron stopped walking near the front gate. "I'm staying outside," he said quietly. "You're kidding." "I'm serious." I stared at him in disbelief before shaking my head and walking inside alone. The moment I entered the house, I noticed the smell. Not sulfur. Not decay. Not anything supernatural. It smelled like body odor. Old sweat. Unwashed clothes. At the time, I assumed the house simply needed cleaning. Now I know better. The interior itself looked normal enough. Family photographs hung neatly on the walls. The kitchen lights glowed warmly. Everything appeared peaceful, until I opened the basement door. A freezing draft crawled upward from the darkness below. The stairs creaked beneath my feet as I descended slowly into the basement. Ron hadn't exaggerated the size of the place. It was massive. Cardboard boxes towered everywhere like crooked walls, creating narrow passageways through the clutter. Dust covered nearly everything. The single overhead light barely illuminated the far corners, and the smell down there was unbearable. I covered my nose instinctively. Ghosts really need showers, I muttered sarcastically. My voice echoed strangely through the basement. Nothing answered. Trying to entertain myself, I pulled out my phone and began recording in selfie mode. So I said quietly into the camera, "I've officially been down here for several minutes now, and unfortunately, I have not discovered any demons, cursed spirits, or paranormal activity." I laughed softly. Just a lot of useless storage. Then I turned slightly, angling the camera toward the stacks of boxes behind me, and that was when I saw him. At first, my brain refused to understand what I was looking at. There, sitting motionless between two stacks of boxes in the far corner of the basement, was an old man. Nut transparent. Not ghostly. A real man. His skin looked pale and sickly beneath the dim light. Gray hair hung in filthy strands around his face. His eyes were wide, unnaturally wide, and fixed directly on me. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He simply stared. For one horrifying second, neither of us reacted. Then survival instinct took over. I screamed and bolted toward the stairs so violently I nearly dropped my phone. I don't even remember turning the recording off. My entire body felt flooded with ice as I slammed through the basement door upstairs. The moment the door shut, the screaming began. Not supernatural screaming. Human screaming. Raw. Animalistic. The old man hurled himself against the basement door from below, while shrieking incoherently. I grabbed the handle with both hands and held it shut as hard as I could. "Ron," I screamed into my phone while dialing frantically. "Call the police. There's someone in your basement." Behind the door, the man clawed and pounded relentlessly. At one point, he began repeating the same words over and over in a desperate, broken voice. "No. No, no." The sound still haunts me. It took roughly 10 minutes for the police to arrive, though it felt like an hour. The entire time I fought to keep the basement door closed while the old man pushed violently from the other side. Then finally I heard sirens outside. Relief washed through me instantly. Too soon. The second I loosened my grip to call for the officers, the basement door exploded open. The old man burst upward, like something escaping hell itself. For one terrifying moment, he stood directly in front of me. I will never forget his face. His eyes looked wrong, somehow cloudy and lifeless, almost plastic beneath the yellow basement light. His beard was tangled with dirt. His clothes hung from his thin body in filthy layers. Then he screamed directly into my face. The sound was so loud and sudden, it physically knocked me backward onto the floor. And then he ran. God, he moved fast. Far faster than someone his age should have been capable of moving. He sprinted through the kitchen and vanished out the back door, just as the police finally entered the house. I chased after him briefly, but by the time I reached the yard, he had disappeared into the darkness beyond the trees. Gone. The officers searched the surrounding streets for nearly an hour, but never found him. Eventually, we returned to the basement together, and that was when the full horror of the situation became clear. In the far corner where I first saw him sat a filthy blanket and small pillow arranged into a makeshift bed. Empty food wrappers littered the floor nearby, and resting beside the blanket was Ron's missing Miami Dolphins mug. The realization hit us all at once. The noises, the moving furniture, the missing objects, the footsteps at night. There had never been a ghost. A stranger had been secretly living beneath their house the entire time. According to police, it was likely the man entered through an old exterior cellar door Tina occasionally forgot to lock. Once inside, he simply stayed hidden among the basement storage, possibly for weeks, maybe longer. Even now, years later, I still think about how close Ron and Tina slept above him every night without knowing. People love ghost stories because ghosts feel distant and impossible. But this was worse, far worse. Because somewhere inside that dark basement, while Ron and Tina slept peacefully upstairs believing they were haunted, a real man was listening to them breathe. About a month ago, my boss asked me to house sit for him while he and his wife travel overseas for a few days. It wasn't a difficult job. All I had to do was feed the dog, keep the place clean, and make sure nothing caught fire while they were away. Normally, I would have refused. I've never liked sleeping in unfamiliar houses. Even as a child, I struggled whenever I stayed somewhere new. Every strange sound felt louder at night. Every shadow looked wrong. It's difficult to explain unless you experience it yourself, but some places never truly feel asleep after midnight. Still, my boss lived in a wealthy neighborhood, and he was paying me far more than the work deserved. So I agreed. The house itself looked almost unreal. It stood near the end of a quiet suburban street lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and elegant black street lamps. Massive windows reflected the evening sky like sheets of silver. Even the garden looked professionally arranged, every flower positioned with unnatural precision. Inside, the place felt cold in the way expensive homes often do. Beautiful, but strangely lifeless. His dog Max, however, was perfect. A large golden retriever with sleepy eyes and the personality of an old man. He spent most of the day lying near the fireplace or following me, slowly from room to room as if making sure I wasn't stealing anything. The first night passed quietly. I brought my Nintendo Switch with me, knowing I probably wouldn't sleep much, and around midnight I sat alone in the enormous living room playing games while rain tapped softly against the windows. By 1 in the morning, the silence inside the house became almost overwhelming. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. The refrigerator hummed faintly in the kitchen, and beyond the glass windows stretched nothing but darkness. Eventually, I realized I had left my phone charger in the car. Annoyed, I slipped on my shoes and stepped outside. The neighborhood was completely still. No cars, no voices, only the distant rustling of trees moving gently in the night wind. As I walked toward the driveway, I noticed someone standing several houses away. At first, I barely paid attention. People take late walks sometimes. Maybe it was a neighbor smoking outside or talking on the phone, but something about the figure felt strange. They weren't moving, not pacing, not walking, just standing there beneath the pale streetlight wearing dark clothes from head to toe, watching. I squinted into the darkness for a few seconds, trying to make out details, but the figure remained completely still. Then, almost embarrassingly, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. After all, I was also standing outside at 1 in the morning. I grabbed the charger from my car and went back inside. Still, I locked the door behind me. Hours passed. Around 3 in the morning, I shut off the game and began scrolling mindlessly through my phone. That was when I first heard the noise. A soft scratching sound. Very faint. At first, I thought it might be branches rubbing against the side of the house, but there weren't any trees close enough to reach the windows. The sound came again. Scratch. Scratch. Then silence. I sat perfectly still listening. Max suddenly lifted his head from the carpet. The dog stared toward the living room window, and that was when unease crept slowly into my chest. I stood carefully and walked toward the glass. The moment I looked outside, a dark figure darted away from the window. I physically recoiled backward in shock. For half a second, I saw them clearly reflected in the glass, someone standing directly outside the house, staring in. Then they vanished into the darkness. Adrenaline exploded through my body instantly. I rushed toward another window, trying to catch sight of them again, but the front yard was empty. Nothing moved outside except the swaying trees beneath the streetlights. I remember standing there breathing hard, while my mind desperately tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was teenagers. Kids sometimes trespassed through wealthy neighborhoods looking for trouble. My boss had mentioned before that local teenagers occasionally cut across his yard late at night. Still, something about the figure disturbed me deeply. It wasn't just curiosity. Whoever stood outside that window had been watching me silently in the dark, and they ran the instant I noticed them. I considered calling the police. I really should have, but instead, I convinced myself it wasn't serious enough. Nobody had attempted to break in. Nobody threatened me. So eventually, against my better judgment, I let it go. The next morning, I told my boss what happened. To my surprise, he sounded almost unconcerned. "Probably those neighborhood kids again," he said casually. "A few of them used to peek through the windows as a prank." I laughed nervously, pretending his explanation made me feel better. It didn't. That evening, I decided to take Max on another walk shortly before 11. The neighborhood looked beautiful after dark, in a strange, melancholic sort of way. Yellow streetlights reflected across wet pavement, while cold wind carried the scent of rain through the empty streets. Max trotted happily beside me, completely unaware of my growing anxiety. As we approached the house again after the walk, I immediately froze. Someone was standing near the property. This time, there was no mistaking it. A tall figure dressed entirely in black stood motionless near the edge of the driveway, watching the house, watching me. The moment they noticed me approaching, they turned and disappeared behind the house. Fear surged violently through my chest. I hurried Max inside, grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen, and rushed back outdoors, trying to confront whoever had been lurking around the property. Part of me still believed it was some stupid prank. Teenagers, trespassers, anything logical. I searched the backyard thoroughly, sweeping the flashlight beam across hedges and fences. Nothing. No footsteps. No movement. No sound. The backyard looked completely empty. Eventually, I returned inside and checked every lock in the house. That night, I couldn't concentrate on anything. The silence felt oppressive now. Even Max seemed restless, occasionally lifting his head toward the windows as if hearing something distant. Sometime after midnight, curiosity overcame fear. I walked carefully toward the front window and peeked outside. My blood turned cold instantly. The figure was back, standing directly beneath the street lamp across from the house, perfectly still. The yellow light illuminated only part of their body, leaving their face hidden beneath darkness. They weren't pacing or wandering aimlessly. They were simply standing there, staring toward the house, toward me. Minutes passed. The figure never moved once. An unbearable feeling settled over me then. Not fear exactly, but the horrible realization that I was being observed intentionally. Not randomly. Chosen. I wish I could say I handled the situation intelligently after that. I didn't. Instead, I made the single dumbest decision of my entire life. Anger overcame caution. I grabbed my phone, unlocked the front door, and stepped outside. "Hey," I shouted toward the figure. No response. "Can I help you with something?" Still nothing. The person remained motionless beneath the streetlight. The entire neighborhood felt dead silent around us. Then, trying to appear braver than I actually felt, I announced loudly, "I'm recording you." I lifted my phone and began filming. At first, nothing happened. The figure remained still for several horrifying seconds. Then suddenly, they ran at me. Notayog. Not hesitation. A full sprint. Violent. Fast. Terrifyingly fast. The moment they moved, pure survival instinct exploded inside me. I turned and bolted toward the house while hearing pounding footsteps racing behind me across the pavement. I don't remember stopping the recording. I don't remember closing the front door. I only remember slamming the lock into place seconds before whoever it was reached the porch. My entire body shook violently. Outside, silence returned almost immediately. No banging. No shouting. Nothing. I peeked cautiously through the side window. No one stood outside. The street looked empty again. 10 minutes passed. Then the doorbell rang. The sound nearly stopped my heart. I remained frozen in the dining room, staring toward the front entrance. The bell rang again. Slowly. Patiently. Then I heard the doorknob turn once. The lock held. A calm voice spoke through the door. "Have a good night." That terrified me more than the chase itself. The voice sounded normal. Polite. Controlled. Not angry. Not frantic. Whoever stood outside sounded completely calm after chasing me through the dark moments earlier. And somehow that made everything infinitely worse. Because it meant they weren't acting impulsively. They knew exactly what they were doing. I finally called the police. By the time officers arrived, the person was gone. I showed them the short video clip I captured before the chase. Unfortunately, the footage was dark and blurry. The officer admitted there wasn't much they could realistically do, beyond increasing patrols around the neighborhood for the night. He tried reassuring me. Said it was probably teenagers. But even he didn't sound convinced. The following afternoon, my boss returned home. When I showed him the video, his expression changed immediately. "That's not one of the neighborhood kids," he said quietly. For the first time since everything began, someone else finally looked genuinely disturbed. Within days, he installed security cameras around the entire property, along with motion detectors in both the front and backyard. Nothing ever happened again. No more figures. No more footsteps. No more scratching outside the windows. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about that person standing beneath the streetlight without moving for minutes at a time. Watching. Waiting. And what unsettles me most is that I still have no idea why they chose me. Not robbery. Not vandalism. Not random curiosity. It felt personal despite us never speaking. That is the part that truly stays with you after experiences like this. The realization that somewhere out there are people capable of terrifying strangers for reasons only they understand. And sometimes when the world falls silent after midnight, those people begin looking through windows,